Good afternoon and welcome to the European Parliament here in Brussels. My name is Barry Andrews. I'm an Irish MEP in the Renew Europe group, and today we're having a discussion on the ongoing discussions around UNRWA, its activities, various allegations that are in circulation. And we are joined by Marta, Lorenzo, who is the director of UNRWA in Europe. And my co-host today is Francisco Guerreiro, who's a Portuguese MEP with the Green Group. So without further ado, Marta, first of all, thanks for coming into the European Parliament. There's a huge appetite for knowledge about the issues around UNRWA in particular. So maybe I could ask you just an opening question. If you could tell us a little bit around the activities of UNRWA today in Gaza, what is actually happening today before we come to these very live issues that are happening.
Thank you for inviting me. Well, let me start with what is happening in Gaza. We have seen an unprecedented war. It is not that the UNRWA has not witnessed before wars. This is the fifth one that we have witnessed in Gaza, and we are seeing unprecedented levels of displacement, 1.7 million people, 75% of the population, and in UNRWA shelters. And when I speak about shelters, these were mainly schools and other centers that UNRWA had before the war that have been turned from one day to the other into shelters where we are hosting over 1 million people. So what we do today is feeding almost or more than 1 million people. We are providing health services, primary health services through mobile medical teams. We are also keeping some of our health centers open to deal with chronic patients, but also to deal with other diseases. And most importantly, we are distributing fuel, water to the rest of the displaced population, including in the northern part of Gaza. So in a nutshell, we are the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza, helping other UN agencies and non-governmental organizations deliver assistance to people in need, in addition to delivering aid assistance ourselves.
So just to set the scene then, allegations were made against specific UNRWA staff that they had been involved in the events, the horrific events of October the 7th. And that has created a cascade of decisions by EU member states and other countries. So can you tell us exactly what those allegations are and what exactly has happened since that, and what UNRWA's reaction has been to those allegations?
Yeah, there has been allegations against 12 staff members who allegedly were involved in the terror attacks on the 7th of October. These are attacks that UNRWA has unequivocally condemned again and again. Based on these allegations, the UNRWA Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, decided to terminate the contracts of staff, even though we didn't have any evidence at that point in time on whether these allegations were true or not. In parallel, 2 investigations have been launched. One investigation that is being conducted by the highest investigative authority in the UN, that was launched by the UN Secretary General himself, and then a review on whether our internal control systems are fit for purpose and were able to mitigate any risk of any staff member that could have committed neutrality breaches. This review is an independent review. It's led by the former French Minister Colonna, in addition to 3 Scandinavian institutes that are participating in the review. There has been other allegations regarding tunnels under our headquarters and allegations regarding 10% of our staff being associated with Hamas. At this point in time, they remain allegations. They have not been officially communicated by the government of Israel to UNRWA. Yet we are investigating what's behind it. In the case of tunnels, it wouldn't be the first time that we have seen cavities under our installations. When we know, we have reported these incidents to the Israeli authorities, and we have sent letters of protest to the de facto authorities in Gaza. That was before the war. Obviously, in the case of our headquarters, we left it on the 12th of October when we were asked to evacuate our headquarters, and obviously we haven't been there ever since that happened. Our request would be that a board of inquiry after the war looks into all these allegations, because obviously we have no access to our installations any longer. And at the same time, there has been over 322 incidents that have occurred in our own installations where displaced people who sought shelter and assistance in our shelters were killed and injured. So we are very, very open to hold ourselves accountable if something has gone wrong with UNRWA, but at the same time, we also demand accountability when it comes to what has happened in our installations that should have been deconflicted.
So I'll hand over to Francisco in just 1 second. I just want to ask one other question initially, which is, you know, there is an expectation that UNRWA would know exactly what its staff are doing when they're not at work. So would you just describe how you engage with the Israeli authorities? Because I know that the names of UNRWA staff are provided to the Israeli authorities systematically, that you just mentioned that you engage with the Israeli authorities on deconfliction. So can you just describe the engagement with the Israeli authorities, both in terms of staff and the overall delivery of humanitarian aid?
We coordinate with the Israeli authorities, and much more now during the war. It's on an hourly basis. All our movements are deconflicted, yet we have had serious incidents both in our shelters and including with convoys that have been hit. But we coordinate with the Israeli authorities at the operational level, and when it comes to staff, we have provided the list on an annual basis of all our staff to the Israeli authorities, the same way as we will do it with host countries.
So the last time you did this is May 2023, is that
The
correct?
last time we did it was May 2023, and we are about to submit the list again to the Israeli authorities. So we never got any kind of complaints regarding
So they never sought to reject a name or to have a name taken off the list?
And those 12 names of the alleged staff involved in the terror attacks were included. Some of them have worked for the agency 10 years plus. So these names were known to the Israeli authorities, yet we didn't receive any complaints. We also do reference checks on staff, but obviously UNRWA is a United Nations humanitarian agency, and we don't have the intelligence of police forces as to be able to know what people do after their working hours.
Just on deconfliction, sorry, Francisco, one last, just to explain a little bit about deconfliction as well, your relationship with Israel.
Deconfliction, we provide the coordinates, the GPS coordinates of all our installations, including our own headquarters, obviously, and we deconflict every single movement. It wouldn't be possible to deliver aid in Gaza these days if we don't do that. It would be simply too dangerous. And I have already mentioned that even if we deconflict those movements, incidents happen. So that is at the operational level, including, for example, on when to pick up trucks from Kerem Shalom or Rafah. All this is being coordinated, as I said, on an hourly basis.
Okay. I would catch up on what you said about infrastructure. We talked about the allegations, the path that you are making to really bring more information to the public and also to the authorities. But when we look at the information that you also share in other organizations and NGOs, we see a vast destruction of infrastructure. So we're talking about schools, medical equipment, even trucks providing humanitarian aids. Besides the obviously humanitarian costs that we also know the data, at least 156 members of the UN, this is unprecedented, have been killed during this military operation. What are the real costs when we look at this infrastructure? How can you provide medical and humanitarian aids if you don't have access to those areas, and then you just don't have the infrastructure anymore?
It is very difficult to deliver aid, humanitarian aid these days in Gaza for multiple reasons. You have mentioned some of them, which is the damage on our infrastructure. I'm going to give you just one example. 10 days ago, we were operating in the western part of Khan Younis. We had a shelter, we had a health center, we had a logistical base, but we have been asked to evacuate those places. So the moment you are being asked to evacuate, you have to move all your operations to another part, and from one day to the other, re-establish your services. This is very difficult in a context in which there is no other place. Because where would you go? You go to the southern part of Rafah, you re-establish your team in a dilapidated building, which is not fit for purpose to provide health services or to manage your logistics. So this is our day-to-day work. I can tell you countless examples in which our shelters have been forcibly been evacuated in Khan Younis, with men and women being asked to leave with nothing. So, and these are people that have been displaced multiple times. So they already had nothing and they live with nothing and they have to start all over again. So we have in Gaza now a situation where about 60% of the civil infrastructure has been destroyed. That includes hospitals, that includes schools, water facilities. It's going to be extremely difficult to rebuild Gaza and for people to return to their homes because there is nowhere to return to. And I would even go beyond because you have to look not just at the physical infrastructure, but how are you going to restore the social fabric? This is very, very important, knowing the damage that this is having on the population itself.
That's a topic that I would also like to go deeper. The psychological and mental effects that this war is having on the community. This is not a thing that even if we find a solution tomorrow, that this can be held and solved in the next couple of years. And this also brings further burden to UNRWA that has a huge challenge of helping in the first needs. But mental health is always like a secondary analysis, but not through your lens. It's a direct correlation of what's happening, right?
Mental health is very, very important. Just think of children. In Gaza, 50% of the population are children. We estimate that at least 1 million children in Gaza need mental health and psychosocial support. And this is, I would say, is not new, because before the war you already had about 500,000 children which were traumatized from previous wars. But what it is different this time is that the children have lost their support system. When someone is traumatized, you look at adults for help, for comfort, but these adults are traumatized themselves. And we have about 17,000 children, according to UNICEF, that are separated from their parents, that are unaccompanied minors, that have no support system whatsoever. So this is huge. What we see that our counselors tell us is children that are traumatized, children that have panic attacks, anxiety. Some of them have stopped talking because of the situation that they are living. And yes, we have established, for example, near Khan Younis, a small center that we call Hope, Khan Younis, bringing hope to children. But there is so much that you can do when it comes to psychosocial and recreational activities, because the very reason why these children are traumatized is war, and war has not stopped. So the first thing to be able to at least try to deal with these children that are in such a level of distress is that war needs to stop.
Before jumping to Barry, also a reality that for me is very shocking is the amount of disabled people and children that now exists in Gaza. And this also has a huge toll on their future. People with disabilities have more difficulties, and we even see this in our society, that is has a social order, so it's easier for them to be integrated, but on this level, without infrastructure, without medical assistance, without food, it's even harder for these individuals, especially children. It's taking a huge toll, right?
Yeah, we are hearing very, very difficult stories from people that had their limbs amputated without anesthesia. You are seeing the collapse of the health system. The primary health system is also very, very limited. I already mentioned that out of our 22 health centers, we only have 7 functioning right now. So, and these health centers or this network was not prepared to deal with these cases. It was prepared to deal with chronic patients or pregnant women. We had a mother and child health care program. And this has not stopped. People are still pregnant, people still need to be vaccinated, etc. So on top of the normal needs that a society has, you have these additional needs in a context of violence, because that has not stopped, and in a context in which you cannot reach people. I spoke briefly about what's happening in the northern part of Gaza, and we have very, very limited access of the missions that we have requested. Very few have been approved. We haven't been able to access the northern part of Gaza since the 23rd of January. So we are seeing, in addition to people with disability, we are seeing starvation. And that is very, very serious. I don't know what else to say. Sometimes we feel that we are left with no more words.
So, I mean, your staff, their first priority is the people you've described, the people who are suffering, and particularly women and children. But the staff themselves, I mean, they've lost hundreds of colleagues, killed or injured. How are they coping through this, all of these last few months with the bombardment, with the stress of the job? Could you maybe talk about how your staff are managing through this process?
Yeah. Before the war, we had 13,000 staff members in Gaza. We were by far the largest humanitarian agency in Gaza because we had been delivering services for 75 years. Education, health, social services. Right now we have about 3,000 of our staff members that still work. But the conditions in which they work are appalling because they themselves are displaced. They are sleeping on the ground like everybody else. There are no privileges for humanitarian staff. And after 4 months and few days of war, they are exhausted. They are also traumatized. They have seen their colleagues being killed. They have seen family members being killed. But yet they wake up every morning because they want to serve their community. They don't want to give up. In times of crisis like this, they feel the commitment. We all feel it. We all feel it. And I would say that we are more united than ever as a team in terms of we are there as long as it's needed. We cannot abandon the people in Gaza.
And yet, obviously, WFP say they cannot go into northern Gaza. UNRWA has not been able to access northern Gaza for almost a month. At this stage, you know, what are the implications of the constant shrinking of humanitarian access for the people, particularly in northern Gaza, as this is getting much more and more acute over the last few weeks?
The implications are not statistics. That's what I would say. The implications are human beings. There are 2 million people in appalling conditions. You have about 378,000 people who are in level 5 of when it comes to starvation. So this is the highest level that you can get. There are people who are skipping their meals to be able to give the very little food that is available to their children. And this is preventable, I would say. It's totally preventable. There has been the ruling of the International Court of Justice. There has been the UN Security Resolution back in December requesting humanitarian assistance to be scaled up. Yet we see very few trucks entering for various reasons, including the security situation in the Gaza Strip. But in the last 2 days, we have seen an average of 15 trucks. This is clearly insufficient. So we call once again for humanitarian assistance to be scaled up, to make sure that we can reach everybody that needs assistance, including the northern part of Gaza.
So just on the question of, as funding for UNRWA is under threat, the question of whether UNRWA can be replaced by other humanitarian organizations, I mean, evidently not, it seems to me, but maybe you could just talk to that question, because it has been, you know, clearly if you're going to withdraw funding for UNRWA, you need to have a plan B, but is there a plan B? Is there any other way?
Would anybody put a plan B in the middle of an active conflict? That would be the question that I would ask everyone, because right now what we have to do is to put people at the center and respond, because the needs are immense and are unprecedented. There are people dying. The lives of people are at stake. Can anybody replace us on humanitarian aid? Right now, UNRWA is the only agency that has the infrastructure, the personnel, the knowledge, and the experience to be able to do this coordination role for the entire humanitarian system, in addition of what we do ourselves through our existing services. So it would be short-sighted to replace UNRWA when it comes to the humanitarian response, but it would be also short-sighted when it comes to think of what the transition is going to look like. And it would be also irresponsible, I would say, to cut funding to UNRWA, knowing that it will have implications beyond Gaza. We are talking about the work that the UNRWA does in the region, and we are present in the West Bank, which, as you know, is very unstable as well. Syria, which is a country where still has not recovered from the conflict. We have Lebanon and Jordan. So it has major implications. Just if I talk about the school children, it would mean that 250,000 children will be out of school in the region.
So we heard yesterday that Sigrid Kaag, who is the coordinator for the European Union, that she told the Foreign Affairs Council yesterday in relation to the allegations against the 12 UNRWA staff, that there is no evidence whatsoever available to the EU in relation to those allegations. So what we've heard from you is that there is a desperate humanitarian need. We've heard from you is that there is no replacement for UNRWA. And what we've heard as well is that we know is that there's no evidence to back up these allegations. So we're here in the European Parliament, and you have very important relations with the EU itself, in particular with DG NEAR. So on foot of these allegations, I know that you've had discussions with DG NEAR about how to satisfy their concerns about these allegations. So could you just talk a little bit about how you're speaking with DG NEAR, particularly in regard to future payments?
Yes, the EU is one of our most strategic partners. In fact, it's the third largest donor to UNRWA. So it's very important for us. And by the end of February, beginning of March, there was a payment plan to be dispersed to UNRWA, to our core budget, which is the one that allows us to support basic services across the region, including Gaza. So when these allegations were known, the EU did not suspend funding to UNRWA, but issued a statement requesting UNRWA to meet 3 conditions. These conditions were to conduct a systems audit, specifically on staff policies. It was to strengthen the independent oversight capacity of UNRWA, and to do further checks on staff. We are now in discussions where they are going on the right track in terms of meeting these conditions, and we are hopeful that the EU will be able to disperse this funding on time, because it's critical for us to be able to have a positive cash flow in March that would allow us to continue our operations across the region.
So one final question from me, and this bit, if I can, is in relation to the overall picture for UNRWA. Your funding relies on member states of the European Union, members of the United Nations, is there not an argument that UNRWA would be centrally funded by the United Nations so that it doesn't have to, it would be under specific supervision, it wouldn't have to constantly have these threats to its funding, it must be the most supervised and overseen NGO in the world. Do you think there's an argument for central UN funding?
I mean, the issue of the chronic underfunding of the agency is not new. It has happened, and there has been several attempts by the Commissioner General, by the current Commissioner General, to deal with the issue of underfunding, not related to the suspension, but we knew that needs were increasing, and voluntary contributions, that this is the way we get funded through member states, were not increasing. So these conversations were already ongoing, and there was an attempt to increase the assessed contributions of member states so that they could also fund part of the core budget. But would it be possible to get it all funded? I don't know. Of course, it would be desirable to have predictability. Because what it is most disturbing for us, and I have been a director of operations in the UNRWA field office, is not knowing how you can plan your resources, because you don't know which contributions you are going to get and when. And that is why we have always been encouraging member states, first of all, to disperse at the beginning of the year, and secondly, to enter into multi-year agreements, and thirdly, not to earmark funding. Our costs in normal circumstances, not in times of war, are predictable. So we know how much it costs to run a school or to run a health center. So it's totally predictable, and that's why we encourage member states to provide us with sustainable funding.
I'd like to, for those who are listening to us, try to understand the terrain difficulties. For example, you talked that in the north you don't have access. If there would be granted access, how it would be proceeded? What would it be in reality? It would be trucks with food, with medical supplies, teams that would be organized, would deliver, would stay there, then would come. How concretely this would be? Because you said that you are being displaced to the south, and in the north you don't have any access. You'll have a military convoy also. Concretely, how does this work?
I mean, if we had access, the first thing that you have to do is assess the situation, because we haven't had proper access almost since the war started. So you would want to assess what's the situation, how many shelters are still functioning. We know that our staff, some of our staff, stayed in the shelters and continue helping, even though we told them that it was not safe to do that. But we know that that was the case. We need to assess the situation of needs. We need to stabilize the situation, because there are so very few convoys getting in. We have seen cases of looting and stealing. People are desperate, people are hungry. So you need to stabilize the situation. We know that the water is not potable in the northern part of Gaza. So ensuring that people have access to clean water would be a priority as well. So food, water, medical facilities, to try to get them to work so that people have access to life-saving services.
So access to those areas, and then permanent structure with those resources: water, foods, medical attention, personnel, safe zones, so you could operate.
Well, I wouldn't like to talk about safe zones, because we have seen out of experience since this war started that nowhere is safe in Gaza. And even when Israel has designated safe zones, they ended up not being safe, and people were killed there. What we would like to have is a ceasefire. It is very difficult to deliver assistance with this level of insecurity. It is simply not possible. You have to deconflict movements. Once you are there, it is very difficult, because we have also noticed in the last weeks that since there is no local police, there is a breakdown of civil order. So what you would want to do is restore civil order, ensure that you can move safely, and then that you are able to distribute aid based on humanitarian needs. Now everybody needs assistance, and everything is needed. That's how I would describe it.
So just finally, from my part, I was at the Rafah crossing just before Christmas, and one of the key issues that people with the NGOs raised was, as Francisco was talking about the obstacles to aid, was this idea of a dual-use list, which the Israeli authorities have, but have not shared with NGOs. And on that list are items that they will not allow to go into Gaza. But this list is so extensive that it is causing a major obstacle to the delivery of humanitarian aid. We've heard that things like oxygen bottles aren't able to get into Gaza. Various radiotherapy treatments for cancer are not able to get in because they're on the Israeli dual use, and it's causing a huge blockage of the delivery of humanitarian aid. So maybe you could talk to the UNRWA's experience of trying to get items in. Are you finding these difficulties? We've talked so far about the difficulties in Gaza, of deconfliction, of safe routes. But what about getting things into Gaza from Egypt?
I think what I could say on that is that if we don't trust humanitarian organizations to do our work, WHO knows exactly what needs to enter the Gaza Strip in terms of medical equipment, for example. We know what is needed to repair water networks, or we need to trust the UN system to be able to, in coordination with the Israeli authorities, agree on what it is needed right now for life-saving purposes, and then ensure that these items are not diverted for the purposes that they were intended to. That's what I would say. It's extremely important, because if we lose trust in the United Nations agencies and actors that are on the ground, who are we going to trust?
In practical terms, it's Christmas since I was there. It's quite a long time. Have there been any improvements in access from Egypt into Gaza? You've perfectly explained the obstacles inside Gaza, and I think people can imagine all of that. But in terms of trucks getting into Gaza from Egypt, has there been any improvement over the last 8 weeks?
No, levels of aid continue to be inadequate. We are very far away from the 500 trucks per day that we needed. I mentioned already that in the last 2 days we had an average of 15. The peak in this month has been 199. And I think that is a problem. We have seen border closures, both in Rafah and in Kerem Shalom, which are the two crossings that are being used. And I think this unpredictability is what is also causing the breakdown in civil disorder, because you don't know when the next truck is going to come. The moment we can have aid more predictable, people will trust that aid is going to come, and they will wait for UN agencies or others to distribute aid to everyone.
So my last question, Francisco,
Sure.
and then I think Francisco may maybe say a few final words. It really is this whole question of the nature of these distributions and the practicalities of it. You've already touched on it, but I just want to get into just a tiny bit more detail, and that is one of the agencies described it as spontaneous delivery. So in other words, it's impossible to follow the normal procedures of a humanitarian aid delivery, monitoring, evaluation, ensuring that deliveries get to the beneficiaries for which they were intended. Now, the last time the DG NEAR did a review, they were checking to see was this happening properly. But now you're talking about spontaneous delivery. We're talking about the breakdown of civil order, the lack of a police force, looting, stealing. We've departed altogether from all of the norms of humanitarian aid delivery. Can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Once again, it's preventable, because if we were to scale up humanitarian assistance, and if we had what I would call enabling environment to deliver this assistance, meaning our movements are deconflicted, our requests are not rejected, we have access to several parts of the Gaza Strip, including the northern part, then we would mitigate that kind of risk. So I think that is what we need, a scale up of humanitarian assistance and an enabling environment, ideally without war.
Well, thank you, Marta, and please pass on my sympathies to all your staff, and we really, our support for all of the people of Gaza, please pass on our support for them. Francisco.
Yeah, I would also reinforce that message. And I think the political challenge now is to work on a permanent ceasefire for the humanitarian aid to reach those who really need, and continue the flow of vital resources, financial resources to UNRWA, and also, obviously, if we could reinforce them, obviously that would also be a priority, because you really need these financial resources to deliver what is most needed to these communities. And so, again, I think it's a common approach from us and also our groups that we really support your work, and we should reinforce that we continue to work on the best delivering of resources to UNRWA, that is making a wonderful work, and you stated that they are working for 75 years, and that's not replaceable. 75 years of building relations of understanding the intricacies of the conflict, of the society it's not possible to be replaced. So again, our support, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.